Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the organizing committee for the invitation, especially Franco, because in fact it is himself who invited me. It's a real pleasure to be here, because I'm not very often in Italy, so I appreciate a lot this invitation, because it gives me also the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what's going on in Geneva. And is it okay? How we perceive conservative dentistry today. So maybe before starting with the topic, just some few pieces of information what's going on in Geneva because in fact we are building a new dental school, so it's not a renovation of the old building, it's a completely new dental school. Here you can see the advancements of the construction 1 month ago or 2 months ago. We hope that it will be ready for December 2015, and of course we try to incorporate also some new ideas when we have the chance once in 100 years to have a new building into this new building. And if you look, for example, at the plans of the clinical facilities, it is not very easy to read, but just to tell you that we will have a large dental clinic, only one dental clinic, where there will be no difference between students, professors, assistants, everything is at the same level. We will have a microscope on every dental chair, not that much for endodontics or for surgery, but for conservative dentistry. And we will also try, you think so? Yeah. And we will also try to incorporate some new technologies. And there's one thing which is quite interesting for me. I don't know whether you know dental glass. Do you know that? Everybody knows about that? Yes. Because this is something we try to incorporate. And it's quite funny because it is coming from Italy. Just to show you where we are and how it looks. So I think that this will already change completely the clinical procedures in a modern dental clinic. Could we have some sound also from the computer? Because from the hygienic point of view, it changes everything. There was some sound in the Look, for example, at the communication with the computer. You do not have to touch everything is on vocal commands. It's really a pity that you do not have the sound. Huh? Look on documentation. Take a picture. Now, the note. Everything's vocal, so you do not have to type anything. Bye-bye. So we will try to incorporate this technology also into our new dental clinics. Maybe some other information on the programs we put up during the last few years. So we have quite a recent program in micro-invasive aesthetic dentistry, which is a postgraduate program going over 2 years, and it can be followed online. So you are not obliged to stay for 2 years in Geneva. We have some modules, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, where you have to come to Geneva for practical purposes. But the rest of the time, you are in South America, you are in Australia, you are in Japan, wherever. And all the communication goes through internet. So case presentation, lectures, and all this is done through internet. And that was the first program. We introduced it 3 years ago. This is already the second group of students we are following. The next thing what we did concerns pediatric dentistry, because this is where it all starts. So we have to start with pediatric dentistry if we want to change the dental world. And here again, it's the same kind of program. It goes only on 1 year, not 2 years. So it's a diploma of advanced studies and not a master of advanced studies. And the idea is not to form specialists in pediatric dentistry. I don't think that this is useful. What you try to do is to form general practitioners so that they are able to treat children in the way we would like that they are treated, so that we can follow a concept over the whole life of the patient and start somewhere. We are also cooperating very, very well with the prosthetic department. We are just right now, sorry for the sound, putting up a common program with Irina Seiler in the field of continuing education, where we will cover everything. So from the non-invasive procedures to fixed implant reconstructions. Because we try to put up a conceptual concept for the whole treatment. And the next step will be a diploma of advanced studies in dental management and prevention, because we definitely need that also. How to coach the patient from the administrative point of view, but also from the medical and dental point of view. We will have a master in public dental health, and maybe a funny thing for you, but we will open these programs not only to dentists, but also to dental hygienists. So you see that things are moving. That was just a small information on what's going on in Geneva. But at the end, the topic Franco gave me was restorative dentistry 215 to 225 perspectives for the future. And when you proposed me this subject, I immediately agreed, because I thought nothing simpler than that. And when I started to prepare the presentation during the summer vacations this year, I realized that this is tricky. This is quite tricky. 10 years ahead, perspectives, predict the future, it is not that simple. And I do not have a crystal ball, so it was really not obvious. So I went to Google, and I wanted to know, how can I do that? What's the best way to predict the future? And it seems that there is a way for future prediction. It seems that you may select within the population a certain small group of people who are called the super predictors, which predict the future much better than the rest of the population. About 4 times better than the rest of the population. It's a very small group, but unfortunately I do not know anybody who is a member of this group who could predict the future for dentistry. So it seems to work, but for the present moment, predictions for dentistry with this group, apparently technically just not possible. So I said to myself, okay, I'm an expert, so basically I should be able to predict the future. But if you go into the literature and you ask the question, do the experts really have the knowledge to predict the future, you will be quite disappointed. There's really research on that, saying that experts are worse than the standard population in predicting the future. And the worst is if you take a group of experts. It's even worse than only one. So basically, I'm an expert, and at the end I realized, for me, sorry Franco, you gave me a nice title, but at the end, I'll not be able to tell you what will happen within the next 10 years. But then, because I discussed it also with my family and with my children who are studying economics, they told me, why do you try to predict the future? Just talk about the technology gap. Do you know what it is, the technology gap? Most probably not. The technology gap is the difference between the potential technology that can be applied compared to the actual amount of technology being applied. Meaning that things which are already here, which are just not applied into practice. And if you read this, it's quite interesting. This is the professor who invented that. He suggests that closing the gap, that is having us do more of what we know how to do, but are not doing it, that's the key, is a more effective way to raise our wealth. I mean, my interpretation is to improve dentistry, than creating new technologies. So it's not necessary that I'll guess and tell you what we will invent in 5 years or in 10 years. I'll just tell you how I see that dentistry should develop in the next 10 years based on, at the end, current knowledge. And this has nothing to do with evidence-based dentistry. I don't care about evidence. Evidence is something for the past. You are using iPhone 6? Do you have any evidence? No. But you are using it. So it's not a matter of evidence-based dentistry. It is a matter of logical thinking and putting the pieces together. So at the end, it's a matter of philosophy. Do you know this philosophical book? Sophie's World? Read it. It's very nice. So at the end, what I would like to do is to invite you to follow me on a small journey in Ivo's world. Now, just to start somewhere. Basically, we have to define the goal. Otherwise, it makes no sense. We have to go somewhere. And at the end, you can take the goal of the WHO. What is WHO telling you about dentistry? It is telling you that dental diseases, at the end, have two major consequences, negative consequences. The one is quality of life, due to the fact that the people are stigmatized. So if you have an extracted tooth in the front, it's not very appealing from the social point of view. So this is the consequence in respect to quality of life. And the second consequence of dental diseases is tooth loss, which has an influence on the ability to eat a varied diet, which of course has consequences on your general health. So at the end, if you want to change the world in the next 10 years, let's put this as our goal. Meaning that no extractions and more or less aesthetic dentition. But I'm not talking about aesthetic dentistry. I'm not talking about invisible restoration on a screen of 20 square meters. I'm talking about restorations which will not be perceivable in a social contact. And this is completely different. Do you read a little bit books? Have you read this? In French, this is really the hot seller. That's the former, how can I say, friend, yes, okay, of Françoise Hollande. And she wrote a book, and she's saying that apparently Françoise Hollande says about the poor people, these are the people without teeth. So it's the apostrophe for people without teeth. Meaning that extracted teeth equals poverty. And it was a big discussion in the newspapers in France, but I think that at the end, most probably this is not that wrong. Because it is true that when you extract teeth, it's one of the cheapest things you can do in dentistry. But if you want to replace the missing tooth, it's becoming the most expensive thing you can do in dentistry. If you do not believe me, just a small calculation. This you can discuss with your patient. If you do not want to care about your teeth, no problem. We have implants as the latest technology. We can replace your teeth by implants. Now, let's make the calculation. Let's take 28 permanent teeth, and you want to replace these 28 permanent teeth by implants. I know that from the technical point of view, it will most probably not be 28, but whatever, it's just a fictive calculation. 28 permanent teeth, at least in Switzerland, equals to 60 to 120,000 euros. Just to give you an idea how much money it is Mercedes S-Class. I agree, basic model, diesel, not the best things you can have in there, but it's about that. Now you will tell me, yes, but nobody really needs a full dentition. You can very well limit you in a premolar occlusion. Everyone knows about that. So we are talking about 20 teeth. You replace 20 teeth. That's a total of 40 to 80,000 euros. I agree, this will not be a new Mercedes S-Class. You will have to take a model maybe 1 or 2 years old. But still. You know what I'm talking about? Now you will tell me, yes, but he's a professor in dentistry and he's showing me a CSS class. I want to have numbers. You want numbers? Yeah, enough numbers in the literature. The most expensive you can do in any case is implants, implants, implants. Nothing more expensive than that. Extract teeth and placing implants. So from the economical point of view, it makes no sense. Now, there is also a medical perspective when we are talking about implants. I think that when we are talking, for example, about diabetes, I'm not in dentistry, I'm in medical diabetes. If you do not treat diabetes correctly, you will have problems with the peripheral blood circulation. At the end, that will lead to necrosis, and you will have, for example, to cut the leg. Okay? And you will replace the leg by an implant. You understand that? Okay. Of course, you can argue, this is a wonderful prosthesis. If I buy new shoes, it has the enormous advantage that it will not hurt. And you may also argue, yes, it is even slimmer than the natural. So there are advantages of this prosthesis. Now, if you are talking about aesthetic dentistry, what is aesthetic dentistry in this relationship? Aesthetic dentistry is this. I have really some problems with the technology. It is this. So basically, you are choosing between Armani, Diesel, or whatsoever. Now, what I would like to tell you is, there's just a little bit of fun, but implants do not solve any of our problems. Because we are replacing caries by mechanical failures, you are replacing periodontitis by periodontitis, and at the end, it will not last forever. Even an implant will sometimes fail, and you will have to replace it. Now, I'm showing this all over the world. And people sometimes say that I'm attacking implants. No, absolutely not. What I'm telling you is that implants are the consequence of failed prevention, failed conservative dentistry, and failed endodontics, because you have to extract the tooth. You understand it? So if we want to change the world, we have to change prevention, we have to change conservative dentistry, and we have to change endodontics. It's nothing more simple than that. And I'm not telling you about caries-free population. No, I'm just telling you that we want to keep the teeth in the mouth of the patient up to the end of his life. So they're difficult. These are, and it is not myself who defined that. It is WHO. Nothing simpler than that. Now, what is for lifetime? What does this mean? So you want to keep the teeth up to the end of the life of every patient in the population. What does that mean? Now we have to go into demography. And you know very well that during the development of the mankind, for thousands and thousands of years, lifetime expectation turned somewhere between 25 to 30 years, not more than that. So keeping teeth for lifetime meant a period of time maybe of 20 years. Now, the situation in respect to demography, you know it very well, changed drastically during the last decades. Today, lifetime expectation, even in Africa, is more than 50 years. There are a lot of countries where the lifetime expectation is 70 years, 75 years, Canada and North America. And there are even some countries worldwide where the lifetime expectation is more than 80 years. You see this small country in the heart of Europe? I'm concerned by that. So basically, we have to develop concepts where we can keep the teeth of the patient in the mouth of the patient for a period of time of about 80 years. It's not 20, it's not 25, it's 80 years. Simple. Now, what is the problem? What do we have to fight against? Do you know it better than I do? At the end, it's still caries and periodontitis, nothing else. You may tell us now or discuss erosion and abrasion. Yes, it is very funny today. Everybody's restoring all these cases and spending enormous amount of money, but that's not the major problem. The major problem is still caries and periodontitis, if you look at the reasons of extraction. Now, you know that, but just as a small repetition, what is caries and periodontitis? Both of them are illnesses based on the biofilm and caused by the biofilm. And very, very often people think, if you remove the biofilm, everything will be okay. Because that's the bad guy. This is what people are telling you. Now, please consider, and you will see in the wonderful presentation after my presentation, at the end, biofilm is necessary for life. So, biofilm is vital and protective. If you look for example, for erosions, there is most probably a relation between what we are doing right now by removing biofilm and the erosions we see today. So at the end, it is not the biofilm which is the problem. The problem is that we have to do with pathogenous biofilm. And these are two completely different things. Now the question is, where do come these pathogenic bacteria from? Yes? Usually we are talking about caries from the mothers. You need, of course, the surroundings, the environment, so that they can colonize and everything. But basically, transmission is vertical. Okay? From caretakers to the child at a very, very early stage. And you cannot avoid it. Forget it that you could avoid it. Impossible. Technically, impossible. In today's context, social context. Now, what you may know a little bit less is periodontitis is also an infectious disease. The transmission of pathogenous bacteria is not that much vertical, it's much more horizontal. Especially at young adults' age. Do you know how? Transmission occurs through saliva at young age. Can you imagine technically how it works? Be careful the next time. But basically what I would like to tell you is the following. Caries and periodontitis are transmissible, infectious, chronic, and incurable diseases. Once infected, always infected. It is impossible to cure these diseases. And because the transmission is so efficient, both diseases are pandemic in industrial countries. You are infected, you are infected, you are infected, I'm infected, you are infected. You have to tell this to your patients. Now, what can you do? I'm sure that you will hear it in the next presentation. So I do not want to go into the details, but I would just like to tell you in respect, I don't want to go into perio because I'm not an expert, but cariology. Statistics are telling you, why do you care still today about caries? Caries is decreasing. So basically, there's no problem anymore. And the politicians believe that. Now, a small example. It is true that if you look at a certain group of population, age of population, and you compare the situation in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and today, there's an enormous decrease of caries. So, example, Germany, year 2000, 14 years old, DMFT index, we are here. 2005 we are here, 2010 we are here, and perspectives, because you asked me for the perspectives, here they are. 2020, 2030, it is true that caries is not a problem anymore, definitely, for the 14 years old. So, if our patients will die at 14 years old, the problem would be resolved. Fortunately for the population, they will get a little bit older. So at the end, the question, or the interesting part of this graph is not this, it is how will it develop up to the age of 100? Guess? You see that? So these are perspectives. At the end, nothing will change. The only change which will happen is a shift to the right. Meaning that DMFT of 2000 will be the same at an age of maybe 20 in 2030. So the MFT of 14 years old in 2000 will be the same for the 25 years old in 2030. And because the population will become older and older, nothing will change. And if we are talking about strategy and prevention, it makes no sense to focus on the young and to spend all the money on that. It makes no sense to focus on prevention for gerontology. It's already too late. What you need, and this is serious, what you need is a concept where you take care of the population during their whole lives. It's a lifelong dental coaching concept. I have no time to go into that, but that's the basis. Not putting all the money into small young people, not in the olds. You need a concept which goes through the entire life. And if you want to focus on something, on a certain population, a little bit more intensively, do you know where you have the steepest curve? Adolescents. Especially for girls, for different reasons. But what I would like to tell you is, at the end, dental prevention is not prevention. What we are doing is, because the patients are infected, and you cannot prevent that, what we try to do is, in an infected population, avoid the expression of symptoms. And this is not prevention, this is caries management in the field of cariology. Just so that you understand what I'm talking about. This is diabetes. These are the symptoms of diabetes. Okay? It's an incurable, chronic illness. It is not necessary that the patient arrives at that stage. We have enough time to counteract. But at the end, these are the symptoms. If you do nothing. Do you know what this is? You got the message? Okay. Now, what is interesting in respect to the development of symptoms is the fact that when we are talking about caries, the caries progression from enamel surface to dentin in a low caries lift population is 4 to 8 years. So it takes 4 to 8 years for a thickness of 1 millimeter or less. You have more than enough time to do something. Perio, very similar. The periodontal pockets progression in chronic periodontitis is 0.05 millimeters a year. This is 0.5 in 10 years. This is 1 millimeter in 20 years. Did you know that? You have more than enough time to counteract. Now, when we are talking about prevention, because I don't want to, just to make it brief, there are different kinds of prevention. There is the primary prevention and the secondary prevention. Primary prevention, the definition is as follows: to prevent the development of a disease. So, development of symptoms. In my field, the development of caries lesions. But do not forget the secondary prevention. Secondary prevention is whereby the disease has already developed and the patient is protected against worsening of this process. Okay, this is secondary prevention. So conservative dentistry and restorations are not, definitely not aesthetic dentistry. Forget aesthetic dentistry. Restorations are secondary prevention. Okay? It has nothing to do with aesthetics. The fact that by chance your restoration will be aesthetic, this is not the goal. This is just the automatic consequence of the technology. You cannot do differently today. But it's not the goal of dentistry. Now, very briefly, primary prevention, secondary prevention. I know I have time again, tell you everything, but just very shortly. Okay. In the field of caries prevention, we fight against tooth demineralization by acids, okay? Lactic acids produced by bacteria. There is no difference between the production of these acids by bacteria or by exogenous acids. So, the fight against caries and erosion at the end is the same. And people forget that instead of restore heavy erosive patients, it would be much, much, much better to invest a little bit of time, a little bit of money into the prevention of erosions. You can do so many things. It's incredible. Technological gain. Now, defense strategies in respect to caries. Of course, you may reduce the acid attack and the frequency especially of the acid attack, especially of drinks. And here, just to give you some keywords, in my eyes, the most interesting is erythritol. It's not silicon. Erythritol is the way to go. To replace sugars by erythritol. It's already here. You just have to use it and to know it. I don't think that you know. The second is you may neutralize acids, which are produced by the bacteria. Of course, you may reinforce mineralization, which is for regeneration. And of course, you may also protect the surfaces by putting something on that, some kind of an adhesive. Just some small details. Again, you are quite strong Italian guys. You know that this is your product. Sodium bicarbonate spray, which neutralizes acids. It can be used against acids produced by various bacteria. It can be used for acids due to erosion. But use it. It's there. The disadvantage of sodium bicarbonate is that it has not a very high substantivity. You spray it, it will disappear quite quickly from the mouth. There's an alternative which is extremely interesting for caries, not erosion, caries. This is arginine. You know that? Perfect. Use it. Because it has the same effect like sodium bicarbonate, but there's more substantivity. So I'm not talking about fluoride. Fluoride is old stuff. It has not solved the problem. You agree? It has not solved the problem. So we have to go and modify a little bit the things. You will also go for regeneration. It's not granularization, it's regeneration. What you try to do is, you have a mineralized lesion, you will get an organic scaffold inside of that. It's, for example, this kind of things. It's a self-assembling peptide, and then due to that, you will accelerate the deposition of mineralization. It's quite a new technology. We are running a big clinical study on that. I think that it's also something we have to think about. Now, some thoughts about secondary prevention. What do you think about this crime? Do you see the opalescence of the material? Well, it's amazing, isn't it? And the morphology? Quite amazing. I didn't put the name of the technician on that. Do you know why? Because it's a 3D printed ceramic. The funny thing is that it's printed with real composites, not just filaments, real composites. We have the technology. We can do that. You will be quite amazed what will happen in the next months, not years, months in respect to 3D printing. I'm not talking about milling, I'm talking about printing. So, if you wanted to become Michelangelo in the field of aesthetic dentistry, forget it. The machine is better than you will be. It's over. It's over. Dentistry is not art. Dentistry is medical and technology. Forget your Michelangelo. If you want to become Michelangelo, change the profession. Now, you don't believe in it? Look at the algorithms. There's a very nice study of the biogeneric occlusion of CEREC. What they did, they compared the morphology of restorations built up by the software in comparison to 5 different technicians. Good technicians. The machine was better. Just to show you where we are. This is not future. Just use it. Old stuff. Use it. Try to reduce the technological gap. Now we're talking about restorations. You know very well, if you look at the longevity of restorations, you can take everything what you want. Gold, amalgam, ceramic, composite, I don't know, whatever. These restorations do not last eternally. They have a certain time of service, of life. If it's 10 years, you can be already happy. If it's 15 years, it's even better. If it's 20 years, you are gone. So, the fact is that at the end, we are in front of a population which will become 80, 90, 100 years old, and you have restorations at your disposal which will last maybe 10, 15, 20 years, not more than that. Meaning that you will have to replace them. And there's another factor which is important. This is coming back to WHO, designing with light restorations which are more or less aesthetic. The problem is that the aesthetic appearance of natural dentition is changing through the life. So meaning that you will realize at a certain age, on a certain patient, a wonderful restoration, completely invisible, perfect. 10 years later, it will be visible. Not because the restoration has changed, but because the dentition around will change. Definitely. And if it's not after 10 years, it will be at 15 or 20 years. So meaning that nothing is eternal. And this, in my eyes, is extremely important in the field of a restorative concept. There is nothing like a definitive restoration. Forget definitive restoration. The only restoration which is definitive is the last one. All the rest is temporary. And I am not talking about restorations which will last 2 years, or 5 years, or 7 years. I am talking about restoration that will last 15, 20, 25 years. You got the message? It is very, very important. Now, in this context, we are talking about money. And the question is, how can we handle the situation from the financial point of view so that the patient, at the end, is able to pay for it? Fortunately, especially in Switzerland, we still have fee-for-service. There's no insurance. You have 2 ways to handle the problem. The one way is the violet one, the other one is the green one. This is, let's say, the social way, the violet one. Let's assume that you have a patient which, at 15 years old, will develop a caries lesion which has to be restored. You restore it in the social way, so cheap, rapid. The longevity of this restoration will not be very, very long due to the fact that you do not have a lot of time to realize it. It will maybe survive 5, 6 years. You will replace it once, second, third, all of a sudden you will not have enough dental substance to realize that restoration, and you will crown the tooth. Crown, quite expensive. But crown will not solve the problem. Maybe it will last 15 years, but after 15 years, maybe you will have to replace it, maybe for aesthetic reasons, if it is a frown crown. So you will replace it with a second crown, you are already here, and maybe if the bad patient is lucky, you will still be able to keep the vitality. If not, you will have to devitalize the tooth, pose, build up, crown, and you are here. Now, if everything will go well, the patient will die this step, still with the tooth in his mouth. But maybe the root was fractured, because the pose by chance was already arrested. You will have to extract the tooth, and you will place an implant. And everything will explode. Extremely expensive. And the implant will not last forever. Maybe you will have to replace it. So at the end, at the beginning, extremely cheap, but what people forget is that you will have to cope with this situation during 8 years. So it will be extremely expensive. So what we advise to our students is, do it in the best possible way at the beginning. The best possible way. Minimally invasive small restoration, 300, 400, 500 euros. I don't care, because you will have the time maybe of 1 hour. You will be able to use microscope, you will be able to do it in the best possible way. It will not be eternal, but instead of lasting maybe 5 or 6 years, it will survive maybe 10 years, 15 years. So it will slow down, slow story. Which in turn, and this is the interesting point, not just for the patients, but also for the social system, will be much less expensive at the end of the life of the patient. So what I want to tell you is, I think that we have to change dentistry. Completely. It's really time, because the technology is here, and again, I'm not telling you something new. All this is old stuff. But just put it into action, reduce the technological gap. One point is, inform the patient. They don't know. They still think, dentistry is expensive, he wants my money, he wants to extract my teeth. No, dentistry may be completely different. Second, change your philosophy. Be medical. Medical does not mean surgical. Surgery is just a very, very small part of medicine. Did you know that? Surgery is not medicine. So if you want to be a medical field, the most important, I think you learned that in your first year of studies, is don't do any harm. Okay? With your tradition, you know better than we do. So be conservative, try to repair, restore instead of replacement and extraction. Do we do that? Small study from France. What's going on here? I'm really very sorry about the technical issues because there seems to be some serious problems with the presentation. Do we know that? Look at that. The question was, private practitioners, when do you start drilling? At what stage of the caries? The majority, when caries was in hammer. Makes no sense, but it's the reality. What about preparations in general? The most destructive preparation you can imagine is a crown preparation. It's not myself who is telling you. These are the prosthodontic people who published that already years and years ago. So, the second important thing is, do not prepare any crowns. Crown preparation is forbidden, formally forbidden. That does not mean that you will ever insert crowns, because there might be teeth, for example, which has to be crowned, because already the tooth is such that you will have to protect the tooth from all sides. So non-crack crowns, this may occur. This is the case from Laurent Deneke, who is in charge of pediatric dentistry in my division. It was a patient without enamel. No preparation, everything recovered with lava composite crowns, CAD-CAM crowns. Makes sense, because you want to protect the teeth, but it is not preparation. Another thing is, if you have to replace old ceramic restorations, it is not necessary to grind them down. You may take an erbium laser and look what happens. I have the signal on my computer, but there's no signal there. And it's already for the second time. Okay, I'll show it to you again. I hope that now it will work. Okay, so what we do here is we have a selective absorption of erbium light radiation by water. All these veneers and crowns were luted with composite materials, meaning that the light radiation goes through the ceramic. There's no water in there. And at the end, it's focused on the luting layer of the composite. So just by using subablative laser radiation, I'm not grinding down the ceramic. Look what happens. You can remove it without any damage. And it's not only one, all of them. Absolutely no harm to the tooth. So again, the technology has been here for years. Use it. Reduce the technological gap. And the other thing is, another principle which is very important for me is the KISS principle. You know what KISS means? Keep it simple and safe. Because it will be less expensive and you will sleep much quieter. Did you know that the dental profession is one of the professions which is touched to the highest degree with burnout? I'm not astonished when I see all these reconstructions. Do it simple. You will sleep quietly. Your patients will sleep quietly, and it will be less expensive. Just a small example, MIH, instead of grinding all this down, what we do, we just first desensibilize these teeth with tooth mousse, then we apply a glass ionomer without drilling, just to protect the surface, and this is it. We have cases over 10 years like that. It is not aesthetic because we are not talking about aesthetic dentistry, we are talking about secondary prevention. I do not want to grind this tooth down, because the patient is 6 years old. So he will live another 90 years. It's just a protection. Another example. You know what that is? Fluorosis. Okay, what would you do? In the old days, crowns. If you are a very progressive dentist, most probably veneers. If you are even more progressive, most probably composite. Now, all this is not necessary. It is just some microabrasion and bleaching, no restoration. You will tell me this is peanuts, everybody is doing that, has been done that for years, it's nothing simpler than that. So let's have a little bit more complicated case. Fluorosis again, what will you do? The same thing. I'm not talking about orthodontics. The patient doesn't care about orthodontics. It's not his problem. His problem is these dark teeth. Absolutely no preparation, absolutely no restoration. You don't believe me? Here's the step by step. Now, what I want to tell you is that today, conservative dentistry does not mean anymore that you have to drill. Conservative dentistry means that you may go for non-invasive restorations. Small example. We are talking about this patient, high caries risk, you see here. Of course, this will be a classic restoration, but here, initial cavities, what is the choice? You will apply fluoride, 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 you will break. We prefer, in these cases today, a non-invasive adhesive restoration. Non-invasive means you will not drill. So, you will not do any harm, and it's simple. It will be a class 2, but you will not drill. And the deciding factor in this situation is whether there is already an enamel cavitation or not. Because if you have enamel cavitated, you will not be able to go for this non-invasive restoration. If you have only a demineralization and even a lesion in dentin, who cares? You can see it. Okay? So the deciding point is, how can I diagnose cavitation or non-cavitation? And we have a method to do that. So what you do, you apply diagonal. You need just an infrared dye which can penetrate inside of the lesion and which is visible with diagonal. You know what it is? Intercerian cream. You know that? It's used for photoactivated disinfection in periodontology. Nothing simpler than that. So we can diagnose whether there is a cavity or not, meaning that we have the indication for this non-invasive adhesive restoration in the proximal region. You cannot do that with a radiograph. Impossible. How does it work? Simple. Metallic strip with aluminum oxide, you remove the biofilm mechanically with that, and you remove the hypermineralized superficial enamel layer. Then you need just normal phosphoric acid, you have been always using, and we will treat here 4 lesions, 4 cavities, demineralized cavities. Distal 5, mesial 6, distal 6, mesial 7. We will not protect the adjacent teeth. We will treat always 2 proximal surfaces. Phosphoric acid etching, we'll take a dental floss to put this phosphoric acid everywhere on the proximal. We will rinse and dry. We will dry with cetanol. Very simple. We will check on the etching pattern, nothing simpler than that. And then we will apply a 1-component adhesive which will be able to penetrate inside of these lesions. So we'll establish adhesion. We will also use a dental floss to put it everywhere. And look what happens. These are different adhesive systems where we check with the confocal laser microscopy what is the penetration ability of these different adhesive systems. And we discovered that Scotch Bond Universal penetrates like crazy into these lesions. We compared that with Icon. Do you know Icon? Very good. It's better than Icon. Much better. And it does not discount. Now, we remove the solvent, and the next step, we will use a flowable composite, because Icon, for example, is not completely tied against H+ ion penetration. So it is not completely impermeable for acid penetration. To be able to have an impermeable surface, you need a composite. Nothing simpler than that. You take a low viscosity flowable composite, you apply it interdentally. You have to take care a little bit. Yes, you need optical magnification to control that, to remove the excess material, of course, to check on that through your mirror. But simple, much simpler than a class 2 cavity. Then you have to insert the metallic matrix not to glue the two teeth together, and you polymerize. Finally, remove the matrix, you apply glycerin gel, you cure through the glycerin gel to avoid the oxygen inhibition layer. We'll talk about that. Then you remove the glycerin gel by water, and the restoration is done. We use for this high-power LED light curing units. I recommend you in general terms, use the most powerful light curing units you can find. because we recently published a paper where we checked on the influence of high power light curing units on marginal adaptation of composite restorations. There is no negative effect. So you may use even 2000 ml per square centimeter, no problem in respect to marginal adaptation. It will not be worse than if you are using a low power lamp. The low power lamp has the disadvantage that most probably you will undercure the material and you will have coloration, you will have bad mechanical properties, fractures, etc., etc. What Professor Tovanetti showed you already on these old slides. We just check on excess, that there's no excess, and this is aesthetic dentistry, okay? Do you have any problems with that? Do you see somewhere a restoration which is not aesthetic enough? Thank you. Now, you can combine that with a dyed laser, which penetrates very well in dental substance, because you know well that this infrared light penetrates like hell. And there's a very nice study showing you that with this laser, in addition to the perfect sealing, you may even kill bacteria through enamel and dentin. No problem to combine that. It has been here around for about 20 years. You just have to know and use it. Reduce the technological gap. Now, if you decide to prepare on a proximal cavity, we published that already, it's almost 10 years old, it's quite funny. You are not obliged to prepare a cavity, a class 2 cavity. Even a class 2 lesion may be restored in the sense of a class 1 cavity. Old stuff, but nobody's applying it. What do? We just penetrate from the occlusion, we remove caries dentin, we leave the proximal ridge intact, because in many, many instances, enamel is only mineralized and there's no cavitation. You just have to realize that. You can check that you removed all the caries dentin in dentin, cold light, or you may use dyes, but dyes in my division are strongly forbidden because they very often interfere in a negative way with adhesive systems, and they are not selective. So you are coloring everything. You have a young patient with young dentin, open dental tubuli, it penetrates light into the dental tubuli, and this is no caries. They are far too aggressive. This is why they are formally forbidden. On the other hand, if you want to check on caries excavation, use this, the face method. Do you know that? Yes, you know it. But you are using it? No. So use it. There are two technologies you can apply. One is a video camera, quite expensive, where the fluorescence of caries dentin is red and the sound tooth structure is blue or green. You can have the same thing also with a small light, like a light curing unit, and then you just need a filter. It is not very handy, but what we did, we just integrated this filter into the microscope, so we can excavate real time under the microscope. It's very, very simple. It was a nice work of one of our master students. It looks like that. You just need the filter in the microscope, and you see what you are doing. You are not obliged to color, do. You see the fluorescence during the excavation. So it's very, very rapid. And then you continue with a small adhesive restoration. As you can see here, very simple. It's always class 1. Adhesive system, whatever you want. I don't care. We can talk 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours about adhesive systems, but the topic, I think, is a little bit outdated. Now, composite. Polymerization through the glycerin gel. So in that way, you eliminate the oxygen layer on top of the composite. You are not obliged to finish and polish, nothing. And you are not in contact with the matrix. Think about it. And then, just radiation from the proximal. Is this aesthetic? Do you need more aesthetic restoration? Thank you. Okay. Do you have any problems with the occlusion and morphology? No. Thank you. A little problem is when you are following the patient, because the cavities are very small and very deep. So if you look at the radiographs, you have to accommodate to that. See that? It's very, very deep. But of course, the enamel layer is still there. So you have to advise your dental hygienist what you did, because otherwise the people will not understand when they see the radiograph. Now coming to redentistry. Very shortly, will you give me another 5 minutes or should I stop? Okay. So redentistry, Professor Tovanetti told you already, instead of replacing, we prefer to repair. That's the main reason why our restorative concept is based 100% on composites. No ceramics. No ceramics. Because you cannot repair ceramic by ceramic. You can repair it with composite, but it makes no sense. So you start already with composites, because in that way you are not obliged to replace everything, you may repair. Repair, very simple. Let's check on that, old stuff. You just reduce the visible surface to about 1 millimeter, 1.5 millimeters, to have enough space to reshape and rebuild it by hand, free hand bonding, within the mouth of the patient. In respect to the adhesion, you are in face of 3 different substrates, composite, enamel, dentin. So with a classic system, it is true that it is a little bit complicated because you have to go through different steps. So I'll show you very rapidly how we proceed today with a one-component universal adhesive system. And I think that if you consider that you have studies of 5 to 6 years, according to in dentistry, it should be possible to apply it correctly. Because in fact, there are not more than 3 steps. The first is sandblasting of the composite, the second is phosphoric acid etching of the enamel, and then you apply a one-component universal adhesive system over everything. I hope that this is sufficiently simple so that really everybody can do that. Especially, again, if you consider you studied for 5 or 6 years dentistry. Here you can see that in the clinical situation, sandblasting, phosphoric acid etching of enamel, application of the one-component adhesive system, polymerization, and a stratification which is a little bit more complex than what you saw before. Like that. This is before and after. No replacement, just modification. And this from the vestibular side. You may say that it is maybe not enough aesthetic to be presented in Las Vegas. I agree. But the patient was he agreed more than enough with that. Divided piece, very, very briefly. Very recently we performed 2 nice studies together with the Barcelona friends we have, where we looked at the restoration of divided front teeth. Because you know that everybody is telling you, for front teeth you need post, core and crowns. And our philosophy, no post, no cores, no crowns. So we had to test that. And we look first at the fracture resistance of these front teeth, which were restored in different ways. You will see it immediately. What we did was, we restored these teeth with short post and cores, with long post and cores, and endocrown. No post at all. If you look at the fracture strengths, absolutely no difference. No difference. And what we did, we tested these 3 groups out of composite and also out of ceramic blocks. It was lava and ceramic blocks. Difference between ceramic and composite? 0. Absolutely no difference. So for us it's clear. No posts, no cores. Endocrowns also front teeth, out of composite. Definitely not out of ceramic. We completed the study with the evaluation of marginal adaptation, because we wanted to say not just fracture strength, but also what is the marginal adaptation of these 2 restorations. Look at that. So this is composite, 3 composite groups, 3 ceramic groups. No difference in marginal adaptation before loading. If you look after loading, there is a clear difference between, and even significant difference between ceramic and composite. Composite is significantly better than ceramic. Do you know why? It has to do with biomechanical properties. You know about elasticity. Ceramic is too stiff. It is too stiff. We know that for about 25 to 30 years. So it makes not a lot of sense to use ceramic. If you use composite, you have the elasticity of dentin. So the restorative material behaves the same like the tooth. And now we are talking about toughness, not about the osmosis, but about toughness. The interesting story is that, for example, this composite block has about the same toughness like Emax. There's not a major difference. Like Emax, not like standard ceramic. So things are changing. Now if you look at wear resistance, again, we take Emax, here, EX, and we compare it with Lava Ultimate. It's a study which was done by the group of Werner Merman. It's a very nice study because he checked on the wear resistance of the material and of the bruising crust, and he made a total. So here you have Lava Ultimate, here you have Emax. This is the wear of the material for Emax. This is the wear of the material for Lava Ultimate. Of course, Emax is better than Lava Ultimate, but this is the wear of the opposing cast against Emax, and this is the wear of the opposing cast against Lava Ultimate. So the total at the end is Emax here and Lava Ultimate here. Funny. Now you will tell me these are in vitro data. You do not have enough data for composite blocks in the mouth of the patient. There is a 10-year study with composite CEREC blocks published in the US very, very recently. Do you want to see the results? I'll show it to you anyway. After 10 years, after 10 years, composite is better than ceramic. And let me end the last 2 to 3 minutes with devices. So we are in front of irreversible pulpitis, where everybody usually will do a traditional endodontic treatment. Now, the world is changing. There's enough literature telling you that this is not necessary. Even on adult teeth, you may go for pulpotomies instead of doing conventional endodontics. And you may even disinfect the remaining tissue with photoactivated disinfection. This is a very recent work, read it. It's available maybe 2 to 3 days, on photoactivated disinfection of karyogenic bacteria. It's Serge Bouillaguet, who is taking care of endodontics in my division, who is very much involved in that. So in such a case, irreversible pulpitis, what you do, you just relocate subgingival located margins to supragingival, what we do routinely, just to be able to isolate correctly the operative field. Then here you see the vital tissue very, very clearly. What you do then, you do a so-called vital bulk therapy. So you do look into the root canals, you just leave the vital tissue in the root canals, and you recover with something which is biocompatible. Now, what is biocompatible? If you go into history, this has been done for decades, on immature teeth with calcium hydroxide. Calcium hydroxide is even a little bit too aggressive because it induces dentinogenesis in a very, very intensive way. So you may have calcifications. But what is known already for many, many years is the fact that all this, which was done on immature teeth, is not dependent on the age of the patient. You can do it in any age of the patient, not just for immature teeth. And what the people also discovered, what is very well known, is the fact that calcium hydroxide is not the gold standard for this. It is MTA. Even on the long term, it is MTA because it is less aggressive in the release of calcium hydroxide than pure calcium hydroxide, and it is also stable. It will not disappear because it's a cement. So at the end, you can do that with MTA. It has been done, teeth pulpotomies on permanent teeth with MTA, but unfortunately, from the clinical point of view, MTA is extremely expensive, and it's not that easy to handle. I think if you are working with MTA, you know what I'm talking about. So we are looking for an alternative material, which is easy to handle, which is less expensive than MTA, and we found one. That's the total film. It's also a silicate cement. It has a very, very similar mechanism of action like MTA, but from the clinical point of view, it is much easier in the application. And here also, there are 2 nice publications now in the literature where you can use a diode laser, not for bacterial killing, but for biostimulation of the remaining tissues. So we combine it. Total fill plus this 110 nanometers laser. So basically, the steps are clear. I don't think that you have to need more than what you already know. Then you recover all that with a thin layer of flowable composite. You seal the whole cavity with an adhesive system and composite, and you are here. And then, if you want, in the same session, not in 2 different sessions, you build up, for example, your CEREC overlay, like here. It's not aesthetic dentistry, it's secondary prevention. You loot it adhesively, and this is the final result. This is the radio. So what I wanted to tell you, I'm very sorry that I'm so late, it is not necessary to prognose the future. Everything is already here. If you want to work in a different way than what we did for decades and decades, You just have to close the technological gap, and I'm very happy that in my division I have a crowd of very dedicated people who are ready to share with me these ideas and to develop all these ideas, and at the end also to do all the research and all the clinical applications of this, because I would like to show them to you, and I hope that I will be able to do that. Because we are working a lot in the field of endodontology. There's Serge Mouyagé who is taking care of that. There's Laurent Denique who is taking of part of the pediatric dentistry. There are a lot of dedicated people who are part of my group who are working in the field of conservative dentistry. Didier Ricci, of course, our expert in aesthetic dentistry. And there are quite a lot of Italian guys you may recognize on the slides who are also part of this group and who are pushing like crazy to go forward exactly in this direction. And last but not least, also my wife Daniela, who is here. If you would like to see the same philosophy also in the field of periodontology, not conservative dentistry, ask her to come once and give you a presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.